This is Pamela Kuhn, and the curtain is up on Center Stage, the show about the arts and the artists behind their work. You know, I like it when the nice guy wins. And in the music business, so often the nice guy doesn't stand a chance. But in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Tampa, Florida, Lake Placid, and now Greenwich, Connecticut, the nice guy made it to the podium of the symphony orchestras. And this nice guy I'm talking about is conductor Stuart Malina, who is now the music director of the Greenwich Symphony. With one concert already under his belt here in Camelot, his amiable charm and ease at the conducting podium is assuring him of success. An accomplished pianist, he trained at Harvard, Yale, and the Curtis Institute of Music, where he studied conducting with Otto Werner Müller. Stuart Malina has served as principal guest conductor of the Florida Orchestra in Tampa, music director of the Greensboro Symphony Orchestra, and music director of the Lake Placid Sinfonietta. This year marks his 22nd year as music director and conductor of the Harrisburg Symphony Orchestra, a city where he enjoys living and is happy to come home to. So Greenwich, Connecticut will share him amongst all his other postings. But such is the life of a conductor in the 21st century, diversifying to establish street cred and leaving his legacy with each orchestra. But perhaps the most important accolade of his numerous awards and credits is the Tony Award that he received for orchestration in the Broadway musical Movin' Out, the Billy Joel musical. It proves to us all that music is an international language, and he is moving boundaries while embracing and sharing his talents with all of us. So Stuart Malina, welcome to Center Stage. I know that Greenwich, Connecticut is stronger for you leading us in the music world.
Well, thank you. I honestly don't know that I've ever had a nicer introduction. It's being referred to as the nice guy is about as good as it gets. So thank you very, very much.
So you and I have not met. We've spoken on the phone, but the minute I saw you, in your pictures in video, I heard your voice. I knew you were the nice guy. You were the one who persevered and somehow, with hard work, floated up to the top and managed to stay there, without getting knocked off the podium. And you and I know what we're talking about in the music business.
It is a tough business, and there are definitely ups and downs. There have been some lulls and some lows, but I do feel I feel incredibly lucky and incredibly fortunate to have had the career that I've had. A life in music is something to be envied, and I've been living it.
And you certainly have. So tell us about yourself, because I always feel that the listeners will gain a better understanding of your music through you. So where are you originally from?
Originally from New York. I am the first few years of my life, my family lived in Flushing, in Queens. But then from age 4 until college, I lived in Scarsdale, New York, very, very close to Greenwich, and where my parents still live, in the same house that I grew up in. That's right across the street from Heathcote Elementary School. And I really, it was a wonderful place to grow up. I had a lot of wonderful opportunities. The education that I got there was first rate. And I really felt that it put me on a very good road going forward.
Did you always feel this calling to music, Stuart?
Well, as a vocation, no. It never occurred to me really as a child that I would become a musician. I was a musician. I played piano. I did all of the local theater productions. And going into high school, I was the music director of these shows. And even into college, I loved doing it. I was conducting operas and I was leading an a cappella singing group. But it didn't really occur to me that it would be the thrust of my life until late in college. But rather, I suppose if you had asked me in high school about a career in music, I might have said, well, maybe being like a Broadway music director would be something that would be appealing. But
yeah, that wouldn't be bad.
Oh, no, not at all. But the idea of conducting an orchestra, it didn't even cross my mind when I was in high school.
Really? How interesting. Was there a catharsis then when you were at university that kind of tipped the scale? That I know there's a moment in all of our lives as performers where we just know we're going to do this thing.
Yeah, I don't know if there was an actual moment. It was a gradual progression. Mm-hmm. In high school, as I say, I was the music director for most of the musical theater productions during the year and in the summers in Scarsdale. And I knew that I enjoyed it, and I knew I was good at it, and people wanted me to do it. My teacher always used to say that conductors shouldn't choose to be conductors, they should be chosen to be conductors.
Ah,
And
yeah,
that's
there you
kind
go.
of what happened. I had the skill set, and they were like, well, why don't you do this? And I think that the tipping point perhaps happened my freshman year of college. At Harvard, there's a wonderful Gilbert and Sullivan Society. And I auditioned to appear to be on stage in the Yeoman of the Guard. And when I auditioned, they said, well, I'm looking at your resume. Why don't you be our assistant conductor? You've got that skill set and we need someone. And I was like, oh, great. That would be terrific. Freshman year of college, like, wow, what an opportunity. And then the music director quit. And so I ended up having an amazing experience conducting performances of Yeoman of the Guard with a full orchestra. Uh,
Wow.
and then that led to conducting other operas when I was in college. And that's when I really got the bug. And also felt, there's a lot of potential here. I didn't really know what I was doing, not until I studied for
Conducting?
4 years. I learned how to conduct, but I really liked the process, the preparation, working with the orchestra, working
Yeah.
with the singers, and I thought that this is something that I really want to do.
Wow, your destiny. I love that. So, did I hear some rumor that while you were at Harvard, you actually started a small group called the Crocodillos?
I did not start it. It actually is Harvard's oldest a cappella singing group. The group is now over 75 years old.
Ah,
But
very
I
nice.
auditioned in my sophomore year. I got into the Crocodillos for my junior and senior years, but I had auditioned as a freshman as well. It was one of the first concerts I attended as a freshman, seeing the Crocodillos performing, and they were great. And I was thinking, boy, this would be incredibly fun. I don't really fancy myself a great singer,
Hmm.
but I sing pretty well. And so I thought, I'll audition. I didn't get in my first time. The second time I did. And I was in the group 2 years, the second year of which I was the music director. And I did a lot of vocal arranging for them. And that actually proved to be a very valuable experience as well, particularly in the interim years between graduate school and my first professional job. I was doing a lot of work in New York in theater as a pianist, as a music director, and a lot of that involved vocal arranging. And I had all of this experience. I think I've arranged 25 or 30 tunes for the Crocodillos, and I still do to this day.
Is that right? I love that.
And that group, the 12 of us who were in the Crocodillos of '84 and several of the members of the Crocodillos of '83 have had a weekly Zoom since the beginning of the pandemic. And so these are
Oh,
people that I'm in
wow.
very close touch with. We still do recording projects together. They're among my closest friends.
Okay, so I've for the last 2 years, I've been talking about the flip side of the pandemic. For many of us, it killed us when we could our voices were silenced.
Yep.
For many of us, though, it allowed us to reach out and rekindle old relationships, to go within ourselves, to do composing, to record at home. I mean, a whole bevy of things. And I think that if we can find that bright side, it made us stronger. Really.
Well, I've always said it's easy to find the things to complain about. And certainly right now in this world and with the things that are going on, it's very easy to find things to be unhappy about in your
Yeah.
life. But I think it's equally easy to find things to be happy about. And that's what I've tried to focus on over these last few years. There were
Mhm.
a lot of challenges, certainly in the orchestra world, but I think these challenges were also, in a sense, opportunities to examine the way we did business, to find new ways of bringing content and
Right.
music to our patrons. And
Right.
in that sense, I think it was a triumphant couple of years for a lot of performing arts groups. We emerged stronger coming out of the pandemic than we were going in,
Yeah.
and and for that, I'm really proud.
Wow. Those are wise words. I mean, I think going forward, we need to remember that we can remain strong. So
Yeah,
tell me right now, you're taking over the Greenwich Symphony. You've been at Harrisburg for 22 years, I believe.
I think this might be my 23rd year. I started in September of 2000, so I think it is the beginning of my 23rd year. Kind of
So
crazy.
how did the Greenwich Symphony, how was the carrot dangled in front of you?
It's an interesting progression because the first part of this was getting the job in Lake Placid, interestingly enough.
Oh,
I auditioned for the Lake Placid Sinfonietta, which is a very small chamber orchestra in Lake Placid, New York, in the summer, just for 6 weeks. And our principal bassist in the Harrisburg Symphony is the bass player in this ensemble, and he suggested years ago that I consider this because he knew that there would be an opening. I mean, I won't talk about that whole process, but I got that job.
mhm.
The man who was the kind of overseer of the artistic side of the search, the consultant that came in, was David Gilbert. He had been the music director of the Lake Placid Sinfonietta several years back, and he also was until 2 years ago, the music director of the Greenwich Symphony. So when that position came open, when David announced his retirement, he actually wrote to me and he said, "Stuart, I think you'd be great for this job. Why don't you audition? Why don't you apply?" And at the same time, one of the violists from the Greenwich Symphony wrote to me as well, saying, "We have this opening." She also played in Lake Placid, and she said, I think that you might want to apply for this." And so, I thought about it. Greenwich was a very attractive orchestra for me, particularly because my parents live so close by.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
parents are getting older. I mean, thank goodness they're in wonderful health and still completely um, sharp in their thinking and all of that. But the bottom line fact is I live 3.5 hours drive from Scarsdale, and this would give me an opportunity to see them, 8 times a year that I wouldn't otherwise.
That's
And
fantastic.
so that was very attractive. And also the idea of an orchestra, it's a similar kind of orchestra to Harrisburg, in that we're per service orchestras. We don't pay full-time salaries. The players are freelancers. Most of the ones in Greenwich come from the New York area. They're very phenomenal players. And so I knew how orchestras like this work, and I knew the challenges that are inherent in these orchestras. And I kind of liked the idea. I mean, I haven't had a new orchestra as a music director other than Lake Placid, which is a different kind of model, since 2000. So I was thinking, oh, this would be a nice new challenge for me. And so, I mean, when you apply for a job in conducting, you apply for the job and then you forget about it because nothing ever happens. The odds are very, very slim that you'll get an interview. And if you get an interview, the odds are incredibly slim that you'll get an audition. And if you get an audition, the odds are slim you'll get the job. So I don't apply for many jobs because I've been very happy in what I've been doing. But this one I applied for, and lo and behold, I got that interview, and I guess a year and a half plus later, got the job.
It takes such a long time to do a search like this.
It does.
What do you think it was that tipped over that you were the person for the job in the eyes of the search committee and the board?
It's hard to say. If I had to guess, I think one of the things, I mean, in the audition concert that I did, I felt a really nice rapport with the orchestra. I mean, it really felt that they were enjoying me being there and I was enjoying them being there. And we got really good work done in a very short amount of time. These concerts are done in very compressed rehearsals. And so I was very pleased with the way that felt. I also think, for the orchestra board, this is a kind of a tipping point moment for the Greenwich Symphony Orchestra, because up until David's departure and the sad death of Mary Radcliffe, who chaired the board for decades and basically ran the everyday operations of the orchestra, they had been doing business in a particular way for 30, 40 years. And so I think that the board is looking to like reinvent the way we do business. And I think they probably felt that I had the requisite experience with orchestras of this sort to take us through this transition.
Mm.
Other than that, I'm very good with audiences. I speak well. I make good presentations. I'm a people person. But I really do think it was probably the experience that I had in Harrisburg working with regional orchestras, and also the rapport that I had with the orchestra. Oh, and probably not incidentally, that I have parents who live in Scarsdale, so there's a commitment, I suppose, inherent in that
Yes,
situation to this region, that I will actually want to spend time.
I think you're right. Yes, I think you're right. And as we try to get people back into the audiences, yeah, for live concerts, it's really critical that we have someone that can really connect with the community. From what I've seen of your conducting and your speech making and this beautiful way, the nice guy comes out to the audience. You're the guy for the job here. I mean,
Oh,
this is
thank you. You know, I always feel that the surest way to success is just being myself.
yeah, yeah,
I've never been one to put on airs or to change my onstage persona from my day-to-day persona. And if an audience feels that, you know, when I talk to them, it's just a guy who's a friendly guy who they happen to, you know, be at a concert with, is explaining something to them, I think that that really does tear down that wall
yeah, it
that
does.
keeps a lot of people from allowing themselves to enjoy the experience.
And were you feeling the love from the audience on your first performances here in Greenwich?
Oh my goodness, yes. It was a really, really warm reception, both from the audience and from the orchestra family, ranging from the board to the orchestra itself. I feel very welcome. It's always a nice feeling to get the sense from the players that they're happy you're there. And
Absolutely.
that was what I felt, and from the audience too. Granted, I programmed a program that was kind of a surefire win the audience over program. If you play Rhapsody in Blue and conduct from the piano and the audience doesn't go wild, you've really done something very, very wrong.
Exactly. And let's talk about that. You like to conduct from the keyboard, don't you?
Like I mean, I enjoy it once in a while. It's
Hmm.
stressful. I mean, I'll
Yeah.
say that right out there. I've done Rhapsody in Blue from the keyboard probably a dozen times now, and every time it's a little bit nerve wracking. A few years ago in Florida, I had the opportunity to play Rhapsody in Blue, and their music director, I'm the principal guest conductor. Their music director, Michael Francis, conducted while I played. And at the end of that performance, I was thinking, why do I ever do it from the keyboard? It just felt so easy. You know, all I had to do was play the part. I didn't have to worry about anything else. But I do think there's something nice, and I think there are a number of pluses to doing something like this. The largest of which is the musicians in the orchestra view you in a different way if they see you play on a high level on an instrument.
Yes.
They just accept you as a different kind of musician. And that's to take nothing away from the conductors that don't. But it certainly is a very nice thing. And I get the same experience when I play with musicians from my orchestras and chamber music. It's a different relationship between musicians when you're actually playing rather than if you're just dictating
Yeah,
or
it's a definite intimacy, isn't it, Stuart? I mean,
and at the
and
same time, the audience sees you in a different
yeah,
way.
yeah, that's right. That's right.
Appearing multifaceted or being multifaceted is an enormous plus. And over the years, I like having the audience feel like, what's he going to do next? I mean, my goodness. There have been concerts that there was one concert we did, an all orchestral concert of all Russian music. And I came out at the beginning and actually sang the number from Kurt Weill's Lady in the Dark called Tchaikovsky. Danny Kaye sang it in the original, where it's just rattling off Russian composers' names, Malachevsky, Rubinstein, Lorenski, and Tchaikovsky, and it goes on and on and on. And it came out of the blue, and I think the audience was, what is this? This is a classical concert, and our conductor is singing a musical theater tune. So, you know, I try to
Wow.
keep things a little bit off kilter so no one knows what to expect.
You're the all-around musician. I love this. I adore this. And I
Oh,
have to
thank
say,
you.
if you've won over the orchestra, then that is 90% of it right there. So,
That's 90% of conducting, period.
that's right. That's right. Absolutely. So let's talk about this challenge you've got in front of you. I know several conductors who have the challenge of all sorts of orchestras under their belt. I mean, to have you've got like four projects going at one time. What are the difficulties that you find with this?
I think that I would say the two biggest difficulties are just time management,
Mhm.
because every orchestra requires time.
Yeah.
Um, that's kind of just built in. I'm just working harder than I've ever worked before, and that's fine. I mean, I like working hard, um, but I also have to find times to have downtime because I can't go 110% for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. I'll just crash and burn. So that is a challenge, just time management, finding times to have downtime, finding enough time to adequately to do incredibly well for different jobs. But the other one is a little bit more subtle, which is just compartmentalization.
Yeah.
As I get older, things like that happen more. It makes me crazy. I feel like I'm an articulate guy, and then I start stumbling. Anyway,
You are an
compartmentalization.
articulate guy.
It's difficult though because it every orchestra has its own challenges. Well, one of the things that I really like about these four orchestras is the challenges for each one is completely different from the others. I mean,
Hmm.
starting with Florida, I'm the principal guest conductor in Florida, which basically means programming and conducting, and
Mm-hmm.
that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's learning a lot of music for that because the main series that I do down there is filled with a lot of repertoire and often unfamiliar repertoire. So that has its own challenge. In Harrisburg, this is I mean, I don't want to disparage the other orchestra because I don't intend it in that way, but it's a fairly well-oiled machine in terms of how I interact with the orchestra. We have a hardworking staff. I know what to expect from them. They know what to expect from me. I know
Hmm.
what to expect from the orchestra. So that feels kind of like, business as usual in a sense, constantly challenging. Every concert is a challenge, and that's one of the reasons I still love it here.
Yeah.
Uh, but I know pretty much what to expect, how things are going to go, how to prepare, how to do a good job, how to deal with our audience, how to program them, and all of those things. Then you have Greenwich, which is brand new for me. And there's kind of multi learning curves. First is how does this orchestra actually operate?
Yeah.
It doesn't have a staff. It has a hardworking board that basically runs every facet of the operations. The orchestra gets together for performances, and there's our principal cellist is our personnel manager, and we also have a librarian. But other than that, no executive director, no development director, no marketing director. It's all done kind of by this volunteer board, which is a
Wow.
challenge. And just getting used to how that works is interesting for me, and also kind of with the board revisiting how we want to move, like what direction do we want to go in, what will next year be like, and the next 5 years after that be like. And artistically, there's a learning curve too. What can I expect from this orchestra? How hard can I push them without diminishing returns? What kind of repertoire will suit programming best, both in terms of how the audience will enjoy it and also how it will build the orchestra and how well they'll play it. I mean, these are all things that I'm learning kind of on the go, which is fun and exciting. And then you have Lake Placid, which is a totally different repertoire because it's just 20 players. So it's discovering music for this ensemble, reorchestrating music so that it can be performed by this ensemble, learning yet a different patron group and what their tastes are and what I can expect from them. So I like all of that very much, but keeping them distinct and not going to sleep with four different challenges going through my mind is very tricky for me.
Oh, I
And
would say so, and to find time with your lovely family, of course.
there is
In
that as
Harrisburg,
well. I mean,
there is that.
and
So
luckily both my kids are out of the house. My son's a sophomore in college, and so we'll talk to him once every week, once every 2 weeks if he thinks of calling us. Our daughter lives in Baltimore, and she's just gotten out of college, and she's working full time, and so less of an issue in terms of them. We keep in touch with
yeah.
them through FaceTime for the most part. But yeah, I do want to have time with my wife, and I want to have time to cook dinners and to do the crossword puzzles that we do together. I mean, all of these things are an important part of my life, and but I feel pretty confident that so far it's going okay. There are a couple of crunch times over the course of the year where things get remarkably busy, and it's coming up like next week and the week after, and so I'll see how it goes. This is all new. This is my
Wow.
first time having four jobs, and we'll find out if I like it. I don't know.
We'll find out. I don't know, that smile on your face says you do, so hey,
I'm generally
you
pretty
know,
happy.
yeah, I can see that, but you're a
And,
realist.
when you're really busy and you're doing concerts, I mean,
What more can you
it's
ask
not
for?
a bad problem having too many concerts.
So, is Greenwich giving you free rein then to really determine programming, or are you with the board trying to determine where to take the Greenwich Symphony over the next 10 years, let's say?
We're working together. There's a very active music committee made up of board members and orchestra members that I meet with to discuss programming.
Mhm.
Um, and on this committee, there's a very wide range of opinions. There are some who have very conservative tastes who feel like, that we should be doing standard repertoire for the most part, throwing in a few things. And then there are others that are like, let's go for it. Let's do something way out there. Let's,
Yeah.
shake things up a little bit. And so I actually think that's very valuable, getting all that kind of input. I mean, in the end, I am the final determinant. And the reason for this is a simple one. If you come to a concert and don't like the program or don't like the choice of guest artist, you're not going to say, oh my goodness, the board really made a big mistake there. You're going to say, Stuart Malina really screwed up. He chose a bad program, or this piece wasn't a good choice of his.
Right.
And so, and I really insist that I have the final say. But I'm very respectful of this board and of what they've been able to accomplish, particularly since Mary's death.
Yes.
They have an enormous task in running this orchestra.
That's
and
true.
they are all, to a single person, well-meaning and have the best interests of the orchestra at heart. It's just, everyone has different vantage points. And so it just takes a little bit of getting to know people, understanding where they're coming from, and then making choices.
And finessing. I mean,
And finessing. And we're also in a place where the biggest challenge, like most places, but I think in particular in Greenwich, is building our audience.
that's right.
And when you're building an audience, that really affects programming in a significant way. In Harrisburg, I've been programming here for 22 years. The audience knows what to expect. They know to trust me. And so I have a little bit more leeway in terms of programming challenging repertoire. Not challenging to play, but challenging to experience music that isn't as familiar, music that pushes the boundaries a little bit.
Right.
They know that if they're going to come, it's music that I think is good, and they trust my tastes. In Greenwich, I've had one concert, and so it's going to take some time. And so probably I'll be erring on the side of slightly more conservative programming choices. But the beautiful thing is, it's all great music.
Oh,
And every time you perform even one of the top 20 pieces, it's brand new, because you're a different person today than you were yesterday, and you're certainly a different person than performed it elsewhere last week. So that's the beauty of the classical music world, is it's a bottomless pit of great repertoire.
that's right.
And it becomes brand new and comes to life newly every time you perform it.
And you're breathing new life into it. Very exciting, Stuart. Very exciting. Well, look, I wish you all the best with Greenwich and everywhere, because I get the
Thank
impression
you.
you're either in your car or on a plane, which is great. But I want to go
Yeah.
backwards a little bit. I want to talk about your time on Broadway. I mean, here, you get out of college and you're going to play for Broadway shows and such. And I'm going to guess that you were an orchestrator along the way all the time. I mean, with your work with the Crocodillos and really as a conductor, you're forced sometimes to be in that role as an arranger and orchestrator. And you were happy in Broadway so much that, how did the Billy Joel connection come to you?
Well, just to go back to where this all started. When I graduated from college, actually, let's go forward. When I graduated from graduate school, I spent 2 full years living in New York. And the reason was that I couldn't get a job. I mean, I applied for every job, and it's just a very difficult field. And so while I was doing this, I was making my living by being a freelance pianist, predominantly a pianist. I was accompanying, playing for rehearsals, playing for auditions, coaching singers, accompanying Broadway shows, off-Broadway shows, things like that. And it was going well. I was having a great time. I was certainly making enough to pay my rent, and making lots of friends. And I loved that whole world. Now, right out of school, one of the first jobs that I got was a show down at the Augusta Opera Company. I'm assuming it's still in operation in Augusta, Georgia. And we were doing a Cole Porter musical. And the director and choreographer of this was a woman named Karen Aizenberg, who I've known my entire life, because her father, Manny Aizenberg, who's one of the great Broadway producers in history, has been a family friend for a long time. And so I worked with Karen. I was the assistant music director. We put together this thing, and this led to other things with Karen Aizenberg. We ended up, the last show that I did before I moved to Charleston for my first full-time conducting job was a show called Prom Queens Unchained. It was at the Village Gate. It was kind of a crazy, loony show. It was loads of fun, rock and roll score. And Karen was the director and choreography. I was the music director. So now fast forward to 2000, or I guess, yeah, 2001 in January. I got a call from Manny Azenberg, Karen's dad,
Mhm.
and he said, "I'd like you to fly to New York." I was living in Greensboro. "I'd like you to fly to New York and meet with Twyla Tharp." And I was like, "Well, why?" He said, "Well, she wants to create a musical using Billy Joel's music, and she wants someone who is a serious musician. She wants someone who understands classical music as well as rock and roll music, as well as Broadway music. And you're the guy." And I said, "I can't do it. There's not a chance." At the time, I was the music director in Greensboro. I was also the music director in Harrisburg. I was just starting. We
Okay.
had just had our first child. And it was just the wrong time for me to be starting on a project like this. And I said, I can't. He said, "No, no, you're misunderstanding me. I'm not asking you to do this. I'm telling you, you need to do this. This is
Wow.
potentially a life changer." And
Mhm.
so I flew to New York, met with Twyla at her apartment. At the end of our 2 or 3 hour meeting, where she showed me all kinds of videos of things she had choreographed to Billy's music, and we discussed a little bit what she had in mind in terms of the concept of the show. I was getting up to leave, expecting her to say, "Okay, so I'll get back to you after I've spoken to the other 8 candidates." And she said, "So when do we start?" And again, I don't know. I don't have any time. I honestly don't know. She's like, "I don't have any time either. So
Yeah.
when can we find pockets of time?"
Yeah.
And that really was how it worked for the first several months. When we had a pocket of 2 or 3 days, I'd come to New York and we work in studio, and we put together what became Moving Out, in terms of what songs we would use, what parts of the
Mhm.
songs,
Mhm.
what the story would be, what the pacing of the piece would be. And then she went off to choreograph, I went off to orchestrate and to put the final touches on arrangements and things like that. And it became a really successful Broadway show, and in fact did in many ways change my life. It was a great, great, great experience. I feel so lucky to have fallen into this amazing experience. And the Tony Award is the least of it. Yeah, it's lovely to have. I mean, it's
Gotcha.
very cool. But having had the chance to work with Twyla, having the chance to work
Yeah.
with Billy, and particularly with the musicians from Billy's band who helped me
Mhm.
the music together. These were my mentors in rock and roll, and getting a chance to see how dancers work. I mean, and how rock musicians work. It makes you a better artist when you see
Yeah.
other artists doing different art, but at the very highest level. And so, it was a marvelous experience. We ran 3 years on Broadway, 3 or 4 years on tour. It was really great. What
That
can I
is
say?
colossal. I mean,
Yeah.
that really brings me to the obvious question of how did that ramp up your skill actually as a working musician?
Well, that's a little bit more abstract. I mean, I feel like it it certainly improved my confidence that I could pretty much handle anything, because
Yeah.
the truth is I was faking a little bit, in that I'm really not a rock musician. I don't really understand rock music. It's not my I mean, there's plenty that I like to listen to, and I certainly knew most of Billy's songs, but am
Mhm.
I an expert at that? Absolutely not. So now I feel a lot more comfortable in that world. But
Wow.
I do feel that it in very interesting ways, it just makes you approach your art form differently when you've experienced the way others devote themselves to their art forms. And I've had several experiences like this. But dancers, I think, are kind of the ultimate in terms of they live their art. They have no choice but to live their art, because their body is in fact their instrument.
Right.
And singers, I suppose, in music are similar. There isn't a moment of any day when a dancer isn't acutely aware of what their body is doing and how they
Correct.
need to take care of it.
Correct. Yeah.
And they need to spend hours in studio every day, athletically working. It's not just like learning choreography. It is incredibly intense work. After a day of rehearsing, the dancers are living in a pool of sweat because
Mhm.
they've been working that hard day after day after day. Twyla Tharp wakes up early in the morning, every single morning, and exercises and does her dance workouts every single day. And she's now an old woman, but she's incredible. I had earlier had a similar experience when I had a brief stint doing the show Masterclass. I don't know if you knew this. I was a
Oh, yes, I
professional
do.
actor at the Kennedy Center for 7 weeks before the show came to Broadway. Terrence McNally's wonderful play Masterclass about a Maria Callas masterclass, and David Loud, who was played the accompanist on Broadway,
Hmm.
had to take time off to create a different show with Kander and Ebb, and so I was hired. I mean, kind of out of the blue, to play this part of Manny Weinstock, the accompanist, and having 10 weeks, 3 weeks of rehearsal and 7 weeks of performances with Zoe Caldwell, one of the great actresses of all time. That also
Absolutely.
was an amazing experience because she too lived her art form. There wasn't a moment that she wasn't working on being a better performer that night than she was the night before. And so that does, I think that does really change the way you approach how you make music. I'm not an actor. I'm a conductor, but you can approach conducting with that kind of intensity, and in fact, you kind of have to in order to be good, in order
That's right.
to make good performances. And so it's hard to really quantify what exactly it was that changed from doing Moving Out, but it did have a profound effect on me as a person and as an artist.
I think it gets back to my intro when I said you were gathering your street cred. I mean, you have done it all. You are still doing it all. You're moving out. I mean, and to work with the great Billy Joel, who is so musical and so gifted. I mean, divine. Did the Tony Award change your
Yeah.
life in any way other than just the obvious?
Um, the morning after I got my Tony Award, I was changing my daughter's diaper. I mean, did it change my life in any real way? No, it did not. Um, but it changed a lot the way that I was perceived.
Hmm.
Maybe not so much in the classical world, but in the world at large. The communities that I was working in Greensboro and Harrisburg, now saw me as something very, very different, and it did
Yes,
create some kind of an aura about me. And I think that's valuable. Um, but you have to always bear in mind that it's not real. You know what I mean? It was similar when I started working with the Charleston Symphony back in 1991. It was my first job as the assistant and then the associate conductor of that orchestra. And everyone was just going on, Harvard and Yale and Harvard and Yale and Curtis, those who knew about music schools and all of that. And yeah, it's cool and it's nice to be looked at as a smart person because you went to Harvard and Yale. But when you did it, you understand the luck involved and the reality of it, which is that they're schools and they're very fine schools, but they don't define the people who go there. And
right.
so if you can keep separate the perception and the reality,
Yeah,
you're going to be a much happier person. But having said that, for them out there, for the people who are looking at me, the perception is the reality.
that's
And
right.
there is great value in audiences coming to a concert thinking, we've got something incredibly special here. This
Hmm.
guy went to Harvard and Yale and Curtis Institute, and he won a Tony Award. And wow, I mean, aren't we lucky to have this person? When at the same time, I'm feeling, well, goodness, aren't I lucky to be conducting in this community? And so, yeah, it changes the way people see you in a certain sense, but not my friends. My friends were like, "Oh, that's great. We're so proud of you." But we were still we still have the same relationship with each other. I'm still the same person.
You're still Stuart Malina, that nice guy
As
who's
far as
doing
I
really
know, I'm,
well.
I'm the nice guy.
So tell me this, let's talk about how you work. Do you enjoy the process of inspiration in developing a project more than maybe the performance of it?
Well, are you talking about conducting or are you talking about projects like
Talking
moving?
about any project, because I always find that there's a certain fantastic endorphin rush with the inspiration when it comes to you. A lot, like let's say in your case with the Greenwich Symphony, you now have this beautiful horizon where you can program interestingly, and sometimes I feel today. I mean, I think that classical music will endure, but I think it is shifting slightly. And I think we have to draw in more people like yourself who actually have a very broad spectrum of experience in the music world.
Well,
And I
thank you. Hey, I think to answer your question, it
Mhm.
really it's kind of a sine wave. Sometimes it's great, and sometimes it's not so great.
Yeah.
Um, to look at moving out just as an example, I think the most exciting time for me in the entire very, very exciting 6 years was those first 8 months of starting with nothing, with a pile of Billy Joel's compact discs, and ending up in studio when we did the producers the show to raise money and to get Billy's okay. It
Hmm.
was like we started in January. That production was right after 9/11, so it must have been October 2001. That period of time was unbelievably exciting. There wasn't a moment that I wasn't loving. It was charged with energy,
Yeah.
and the people I was working with were excited and had a
Electric.
great working dynamic. It was
Yeah.
electric.
Hmm.
That's not to say that everything after that wasn't great. The rehearsal period was exciting but very difficult. It was kind of wrenching because we were making changes incredibly rapidly,
Hmm.
almost from day to day, where we'd rehearse tomorrow night's show during the day and then perform the night before's show because they weren't ready yet to put in the new stuff. I mean, it was nuts.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so that was wrenching. As far as conducting goes, I mean, there are kind of three phases of what I do for a concert. The first, well, and that's not including the programming and the programming is generally fun. Yeah, it's really,
Hmm.
it's like being a kid in a candy shop.
It
I'll get
is really.
take that one of those, and one of those, and I love M&Ms and I love Twix bars and I love $100,000 bars. Let's put them all together. And anyway, so that's always fun. But in terms of the artistic part of things, the biggest chunk of what I do is studying music. And studying music can sometimes be a grind, and sometimes it can be incredibly exciting. And
Yeah.
there's no real rhyme or reason as to when it's one and when it's the other. It just sometimes I love it and sometimes I hate it. Without fail, I love rehearsing. Rehearsing is that second phase. And
Hmm.
what I love about rehearsing is that it's a time of possibility. You know what the ideal thing you want it to sound like is, and you're being presented with something that's not that, and you try to work with it and make it come close to your ideal. That's always exciting. That you start at point A and you're going to end at a much better point B that won't quite be your ideal. You never reach your ideal. You're always somewhat frustrated. But that process of making things better is very, very exciting, especially when the orchestra is working as a well-oiled machine. And then performance, also, I almost without fail, I love. That's when I get the real rush.
Okay.
It's exhausting. As I get older, it actually I pay a physical toll for every performance that I do in terms
That's
of
honest.
muscles and
Hmm.
sometimes even injury. But it's totally worth it. I love it. And it's not just about the applause. I mean, I love the adulation and I love the appreciation that I get from audiences. I won't lie about that. But it's much more about just the connection that you make with an audience, the electricity that goes in both directions from the silent audience that's focused on what you're doing and the musicians sending energy out to the audience, you sending energy to the musicians, them sending it back to you. It's kind of the synergy that goes in three different directions all at once.
That's right.
It's indescribable, in fact. I can come up with words, but it can't come close to what the actual feeling is of
It's
making
so true.
music like that. It's
It's
magical.
it is. It's magical and it is electric and electrifying.
Yep,
And for those not in music, I can never understand why they don't want to dip their toe into the world of the guitar or the flute or just something which takes them into that realm of that world. And
that's right.
but of course, then many are called and many don't stay with it. And then there are the Stuart Malinas of this world who really are walking the walk. I mean, it's fantastic what you're doing.
Well,
Wonderful. So, okay, well, let's have a little fun now because I think my
I've
listeners
been
need.
having fun already.
I
So
know.
you
Well,
know.
that aside, so let's get to know the inner workings of Stuart Malina, you know?
Okay.
And if I ask you a question like, what do you do for fun? It's not fair to say music or playing the piano. So, what do you do for fun?
Music or playing the piano. No, I'm just kidding. Um, What do I do for fun? Well, there are a couple of things that I do regularly. Every single morning, I do the New York Times crossword puzzle. On Saturdays and Sundays, I do them with my wife. Um, Not because I can't do them, because actually at this point I'm pretty consistently good at it. But it's one of the things we did when we were dating many years ago, and it's a lovely continuity, and it's good time that we spent together. But I also do all kinds of other puzzles. I do Wordle every morning. I do Worldle every morning, and Global every morning. And each day there's a new puzzle that someone sends me to try. So I love puzzles. If I have lots of time, I'll even do a jigsaw puzzle. But I haven't had much time like that since we started performing after COVID gave us the time to do things like
Absolutely. Absolutely.
jigsaw puzzles. But so that's one thing I really love. I really love the New York Mets. And this is a very bittersweet time to be saying that I love the New York Mets because they disappointed at the end of the season. But I've been a fan since I was born. They were born the same year I was,
Isn't
and
that fun?
I am a devoted Mets fan, for better or for worse. There have been, I would say, more worses than betters, but it's
I
it's
love
enjoyable for me to watch baseball games.
I love
And
that. Oh my God.
and I
And
enjoy reading, and I really do enjoy playing the piano too. When I'm
mhm,
not doing it for work,
yeah,
it's a very
yeah.
different experience. And even more than that, if I can find time to get together with friends and read chamber music,
Hmm.
that's a real delight. But I agree with you. That's much more along the tracks of what I do vocationally. But I'm also, I suppose that this sounds weird, but I think that I'm just a good friend. I like being in touch with my friends and talking to them and knowing what's up with them, and keeping those lines flowing. And I have many friends from pretty much every segment of my life, and I value them very, very much.
That is such a genuine answer, and I really appreciate that. No one has ever said that when I
Oh,
asked that question. That is wonderful. That's why you're still smiling, Stuart. All right, if you're like me, you love the art of film scoring. And I'm a big movie music fan, and I really do believe it really deserves, that right to be up there in the orchestra. Do
yeah.
you have any favorite film scores?
Wow. As it well, let me ask you to clarify a little bit. Are you talking about in terms of conducting them as performance pieces,
I'm
or in
talking
terms of
about
having
in
them in movies?
enjoying. Yeah, just in the
Yeah,
movie.
I've many movie scores that I think are fantastic. I mean, I think The Godfather is actually a perfect example of a score that works beautifully in the movies, but if you do it in a concert hall, it doesn't feel quite the same because
Right.
it's so interconnected with the visual that you're seeing. Whereas something like Star Wars, yes, it's a fantastic score and I love it dearly, but you
Mhm.
can do those pieces with orchestra and they'll be incredibly exciting with orchestra. And the whole world of John Williams, I mean, I am of the perfect age, I suppose, because his career kind of spans my young adult to
Correct.
adult years.
Yeah.
And so I always love conducting John Williams music, and do I have favorites? Well, yeah. I mean, I love doing the ET Adventures on Earth, that whole final montage, bicycle chase scene, and I also come to like the 2001, not 2000, the Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which I think is a
Yes.
magnificent score
It
that's
is.
underappreciated. But I'll go further though. Some of my favorite scores are really old scores, the scores of like the 1930s and 40s of composers like Korngold and Steiner and
Yep.
Waxman. These are masters. And Rocha. I mean, like
That's
the
right.
Ben-Hur score is a phenomenal score.
Mhm.
These are magnificent composers who just happened to make their careers as film score writers, and it was more from circumstance and economic reasons than for artistic reasons. It isn't that they couldn't write other music.
Correct.
Korngold wrote amazing concert music and operas, as did Rocha, and that music still is out there.
That's right.
But their film scores are just phenomenal and so magnificently scored. My personal kind of emotional favorite, and I don't know if I weren't me with my background, whether I would feel as strongly, but I think the Ten Commandments is an amazing score. Elmer
Really?
Bernstein,
Oh my
and
gosh.
I think the reason is
Look at you.
when video cassette recorders first came out, that was a video cassette we had, and we had the Ten Commandments, and my brother and sister and I just watched it all the time. I just love that score. What can I say? I love
What
the
can you
movie.
say?
corny and silly, but it's just a terrific, inspired and
Interesting.
inspiring score.
Think how that shaped your life to come. I mean, because it does very subtly and very, very strongly. I've done many shows on Center Stage about film composers, and I've had such a good time
Yep.
doing it because I do believe in some cases the music betters the film. And as you've just said, of course, it's interwoven into many. But oh
Well, and
yes,
in fact, I think you can go further. There are films that are nothing without the score.
that's correct.
And there are certainly films that don't really need the score, but the score is used so skillfully to highlight things
Yeah,
that it
yeah.
becomes part of the emotional thread that takes the audience through.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, very good, very good. Well, what are your favorite films then, Stuart?
What are my favorite films? That's a tough
A
one.
hard one.
Well, I mean, I love The Godfather. The Godfather is a great movie. The Ten Commandments, for completely different reasons. I don't think it's the greatest film. I just love it. But there are many things that I like watching movies. I like movies that make me feel good at the end. Like The Shawshank Redemption, I'll never get tired of. It's like such brutality, and then it has like the happiest ending, and there's a feeling of ecstasy that comes over you when you watch
Oh
it.
my gosh, yes.
I think that's a magnificent movie.
And music by
Oh,
Thomas Newman, we should say. Thomas
that's
Newman.
music by Thomas Newman. I also like the movie The Producers very much.
Oh,
Not the later movie with Nathan Lane and Matthew Broderick. I
the
think that's
original.
terrible. But the original one with Zero Mostel and
Oh,
Gene Wilder, I think, is just ingenious and wonderful.
you can't
And
better it. Yeah.
so I don't know. I'm sure as soon as we end this conversation, I'll be like, oh God, why didn't I see this?
I love it. And what is your favorite color, Stuart Malina?
Oh, somewhere in the blue to purple family.
I would guess that. Are
Yeah,
you a synesthete? Do you see notes? Do you see numbers? Do you see anything in color?
I do not.
Hmm.
I would love to experience it. I bet it's really cool.
I love it. I love it. And do you have a favorite city in the world?
That one, that's kind of an ever evolving work in progress.
Hmm.
Um, right now, I would be hard pressed to come up with a favorite city in the world. For a long time, my favorite city in the world was Venice. And I was fortunate to spend quite a bit of time there, and it was magical time at the end of my college years and the few years after college. But Venice has changed tremendously since then. And the last time I was there, it just felt so congested and overrun, and it just wasn't what it was. And similarly, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody, Charleston, South Carolina, where I was so lucky to live for
Oh,
6 years in the early 90s. I met my wife there. I got married there by the mayor of Charleston. I've got many, many friends who live in that
okay.
area. And for a long time, that was where my wife and I were talking that we would want to retire. But I think that also has changed, sadly, in the last
Yeah.
20
Yeah.
years. And it's become overrun with people and
Mm.
built up and highly commercialized. And a lot of people have bought up property and built these enormous houses that sit empty for all but a month a year. And I think that changes the way that the town feels. And I don't
Yeah.
think it's for better. It's still a spectacular city, and I would visit there for a weekend anytime. But favorite city, I don't know. Used to be, not anymore. New York, when I was living there, was the center of the world for me, and now I go there and I feel a little uncomfortable because I'm used to living in small cities. Paris, I think, will never get old. So I'll say Paris. Paris is a spectacular, wonderful city that all you have to do is walk around, and it makes you happy.
Oh my gosh, yes. To sit down and have a croissant and a cup of coffee is it in
Exactly.
Paris.
So that's an
Watch the
easy
world go
answer.
by.
Let's just say Paris.
Okay. I love getting to know you, Stuart Malina.
Thank you.
Listen, I have one last question for you, and this is an important one that I ask all of my guests. From your heart, is there a word or phrase that you could use to describe yourself?
Ooh, it's hard to do this without seeming self-centered or immodest. But I think I would like to think that genuine,
Uh-huh.
maybe genuine, and if not, going in a slightly different direction. Um, boy, um, competent.
He says with his big smile. I love
I
it.
mean, I feel like I'm competent at a lot of different things,
I think you are
and
too.
there are people probably who do each of them better than I. But I think when you put them all together, it's not even like being a mile wide and an inch thick, but like kind of like, 100 meters wide and a couple of feet thick.
I love it.
So, but I
Love it.
like genuine better.
I
I
love your
try
vision.
really hard to be myself all the time.
That's beautiful, Stuart. That's really, really authentic and genuine. I love that. I just love it. Well, you have given me a particular lift today with your optimism and your zest for life. And I think that only we can benefit from this. All the orchestras you work with, all the people who come into your lives. I mean, this is fantastic for you, and you're living many lives. It's a wonderful thing. Very exciting. Very
Thank you,
exciting.
Pamela. It's been a great pleasure talking to you. You really made it very easy for me, so I appreciate the work that you're doing too.
Oh, I think you are the architect of your own path and your future. And I think architecturally speaking, Greenwich Symphony and Harrisburg and all the others will be fine in your hands. I think it'll be better than fine. They'll be wonderful in your hands. So
Thank you.
thank you for sharing this time. I really appreciate it. And I hope everyone will take a moment to go to stuartmalina.com to hear more about this wonderful artist.
And
And
you can
Stuart,
see my schedule as well if you want to come see any of
there
the
you
work.
go. There you go. And I'm sure people can approach you and ask you out for a cup of coffee too. I mean, you're that
Absolutely.
kind of guy. I love it. All right. To all my listeners, I hope you go to stuartmalina.com and then center stage with pamelacoon.com for a gallery of my shows. And don't be afraid to reach out to me, please. I always love to hear from my listeners. Stuart, all the best to you.
And
And
you
to
as well.
and to everyone listening out there, stay safe. This is Pamela Kuhn, and the curtain is now down on center stage.